Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. And today's voice is, you've got to know who Dr. Mike is if you're an OG bodybuilder, because you are one of the OG guest speakers. I remember you when I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed bodybuilder many, many moons ago. And I remember you from the body power days.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Thank you for coming on today. It's
Thanks for
super
having me.
exciting for me. It's really cool, isn't it, when you meet people on your own journey and then it's like, oh, we're gonna reconnect many years later.
I like it.
For sure. Okay, so today we are going to be debunking nutrition. We've already spoke a little bit about talking about the mental health side of things as well. And, essentially right in this 2024 era, there's a lot of conflicting information, as we know, social media, what we're exposed to, and it can be pretty tricky for people to understand where to go with their own nutrition. Yes, you can have a coach, but there's still going to be conflict. And a question I do like to start with, Mike, is, and this may relate to what I've just said, if you could go back to when you first started getting into the fitness space, knowing
Mhm.
what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I'd say careful who you listen to, probably. I think that, it's crazy to think like how much I think I've learned since I started getting into kind of fitness from my own perspective and trying to learn like a little bit about fitness and nutrition. And I still feel like I don't know anything about either of those two things, but I do also feel like I've learned so much on the way, particularly like what, things not to do. But I also think that at the same time, it's really important to kind of make your own mistakes along the way, because I think it's almost harder to find the right voices to listen to who will tell you the right things than it is to just make a few mistakes along the way. It's not the end of the world if you do a bit of trial and error. If you try the paleo diet, it's not the end of the world. It's just not particularly enjoyable, so there's lots of things that you can do that won't be ideal. But I think sometimes we're always in a hurry to be like optimal and be ideal, like right out off the bat, aren't we? So I think sometimes we could do with a little bit more playing around a bit as well, I reckon.
The word optimal is something myself, when I sort of use that word with clients or I'm speaking on the podcast, it's like actually a lot of people forget that optimal is optimal for you. So what diet can you actually stick to? Because
Yeah.
then maybe that is optimal for you. And for yourself, you're working in a GP practice and you're on social media, you're putting things out there to help people. And I'm sure you come across plenty of these sort of belief systems, as it were, to this works for me, so surely it should work for everyone else. And I think sometimes this causes sort of tribes, doesn't it, within the space?
Yeah, it's really natural. Like we all want to be like a member of a club. Like, you even see it if someone if you put a post on like, maybe Twitter in the old days rather than Instagram now, but saying like I really like salt and vinegar crisps, you'll have like 100 people being like, oh my God, I love salt and vinegar crisps. And like another 100 people going, oh my God, salt and vinegar crisps are the worst. I don't know why we sort of feel that we need to kind of put ourselves in these categories for almost everything, and you have to be kind of part of a club. But it's very natural. But like because even just listening to an episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, and like just the way that people talk to one another. Oh, I've tried this. It's really amazing. You've got to try it. And it's like, and he'll go, oh, why does it work? Like, what is it about it? Oh, I don't really know. I don't know anything about it. Someone just gave it to me and said that it worked. They were talking about like a supplement.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, I've never tried it before. It looks really sketchy. No, 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 it's not sketchy, I promise. Okay, I'll try it. Like it was just there's no kind of science to the conversation of what actually is useful and what isn't. It's just people being passionate. It's like salesmanship, really, more than anything. And that's kind of what social media is at the moment. It's how can I sell somebody the opportunity to give me 15 seconds of their time? And I will do that by making something sound really exciting that actually isn't very exciting at all. And that's why I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with social media at the moment, because, like you say, I do like to put stuff out on social media, but I find it also really boring to just keep saying the same thing over and over again. And I feel a bit like I've said everything that I
Mm.
need to. But social media is all about repetition and actually trying to get the message home. And it's exhausting sometimes. But unfortunately, the people that don't find it exhausting are usually the people that are putting out really bad information. So it's frustrating to see.
A lot of people are sort of calling out some of the fitness influencers as well, and talking, trying to sort of, I guess that maybe reframes it for people, you know, when they get called out by Dr. Rids or someone like this,
Yeah,
and people, maybe that catches the eye of people, and they're like, okay, maybe I'll listen. But really relevant point you said there, 15 seconds. And I myself, when I'm making content, I think, God, I mean, it can be quite stressful because you're thinking, I've got this person for a few seconds here. You got to do the hook, and
yeah,
I'm not naturally a salesperson. It
yeah.
doesn't sound like maybe you are either. And it's a bit like, oh God, where do I go with this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like I get really frustrated by the call out culture because I don't find it enjoyable content necessarily, but I also recognize that it's really important. I particularly hate doing it. When I say I don't find it enjoyable content, I mean to make. I don't obviously I'm not going to cast aspersions on people who do it, especially people who do it really well, like like Dr. Id's. I like his posts and how he does it. But I also really like Ben Carpenter, for example, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
I love the way that he debunks stuff, but in a really kind of neutral, non-attacky sort of way. Because I don't love conflict, and I know that a lot of people on social media do. But um, usually, if I post something calling something out, is because I've really kind of got to my limit, and then I'm just like, wait, I've got to say something now, and that's even worse because then it's not it's not probably quite as coherent as it should be. But I don't enjoy. I'd much rather talk about what's true than talk about what's not true, but it's very difficult to get that message across these days, I think, without throwing in something a little bit negative for the
Yeah.
algorithm.
And I
Yeah.
feel like when there is the science-based approach to it, maybe a lot of people aren't really, like you gave that example in
Yeah.
a forum or the Joe Rogan podcast. It's like maybe people just want that quick fix. And I
Yeah.
feel like that probably is what 2024 is about a lot of the time. And it's really, really nice when you do get people that are keen to learn. But then it's like, where's that, almost that path and that bridge to go, okay, so we want to help people learn and what's appropriate for them, without then going down into the science route too much
Yeah,
and
exactly.
clickbait.
Exactly. And there's a balance to be found. And sometimes I always kind of sometimes wonder if I'm a bit too science driven, because I see this a lot, particularly with bodybuilders actually, who will often say like, I don't want to read a textbook or like hear a study about what might build muscle or what might be the best exercise for something. Like you always see like more of the old school bodybuilders going like, Arnold didn't have scientific references, Dorian Yates didn't have scientific references. They just lifted heavy stuff and just got on with it. And there is that kind of like old school mentality. But it's a valid point as well. I think what's really important to mention, because I think it gets really misconstrued, is just science is just the collection of evidence. And evidence doesn't always have to be clinical trials and stuff like that. It can be anecdotal evidence as well, but it's just that certain things have more powerful evidence behind them than anecdotal evidence. So if one person tells you that this exercise is really good for, I don't know, building big arms or whatever, then you might take it with a pinch of salt. But if everybody is saying that that is because they've all tried it and they've all got really big arms by doing it, I have yet to find that exact exercise. But you're going to take that more seriously, aren't you? And then if you've got a scientific paper that's compared two different types of exercise and then demonstrates like proof that one is better than the other, then you're going to believe that even more, particularly if it's a well-run study. And that's when that becomes a bit complicated too, because if you can't read studies, then you can't necessarily differentiate between those things. So it's just trying to empower people to find what works for them. And for some people, again, like some people will just want to get on with it, do trial and error and see what works for them. And that's also absolutely fine as well, but it's just trying to get people to, I guess, realize what's truthful at least, and what is just people trying to sell people stuff.
I feel like as well, there can sometimes be almost like people forget what the fundamentals of being a bodybuilder or changing your lifestyle to be more favorable to what your goals are. And that's beyond physique based, from a health standpoint as well. Like the basics are what people class as sort of the boring,
Yeah.
it's like drink more fluid, go to the gym, do
Yeah.
some steps. And it's like when you do see things pop up and for whatever reason it resonates with you, I like this person, this brand, I know someone like that, or that's me. it's like this clickbait thing, isn't it? And we can, the two of us can't stop that. However, podcast talks are useful as well. And also I feel like, you know, this culture that we find ourselves in, when people go into yo-yo dieting, or like you mentioned, paleo, or whatever it may be, there's a reason for that, you know, why people are going into a diet, then they're coming out of it, then they're doing another one, then they're coming out of it. I don't know if you sort of have communications with anyone, or if someone's listening and they are stuck on this sort of hamster wheel of yo-yo dieting and not really knowing what fits for them, where you would sort of direct them, or there's certain ways that you give them information to try and help them understand the basics first.
You mean with specifically with regards to yo-yoing, or just general
Yeah, to
nutrition
come away
information?
from, yeah, you know, if someone finds themselves caught in this almost loophole of doing that, whereas they could put some basics in place and maybe then evolve what they get from dieting, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really difficult about it when it comes to yo-yo dieting, I think generally that's the default position for most people in society, and I think that has come from like a heavy focus on the diet culture that we sort of see ourselves surrounded by, and kind of this constant pressure to be smaller for, you know, whatever that looks like to people. And I think that in the majority of situations, it's not that people genuinely inherently want to lose weight or be healthier or whatever. It's just kind of this almost like peer pressure that they've just got to because that's what everybody else is doing. And I think that when you're in that mindset, you're unlikely to throw a whole load of energy into it. You're likely to do the superficial things, like you're likely to listen to adverts or things that you see on the TV that are going to guarantee you fast results. And so most people sort of fall victim to these things. And I think that that's kind of more common than not. But I think in order to take people away from that, you do have to have a little bit of a buy-in from those people, because it takes a little bit more effort. I mean, funnily enough, it takes more effort to find the right information, but it actually takes a lot less effort to live the type of lifestyle that they're actually genuinely wanting to live. Like it's easier than the yo-yo dieting. It's easier to, you know, make small changes and eat more sensibly than it is to do paleo or the carnivore diet or whatever. And that's what's really frustrating, is it's trying to get people to realize that. And that's again counteracting that misinformation from like the diet industry, but it's also getting people to pay attention. Because I've even got, you know, like I've got friends of mine who are like, yeah, I'm doing, you know, whatever diet it is. And I'm like, but you know that this is not, yeah, no, I do know that it's nonsense actually, but I just really want to look good for this one wedding that I'm going to, and then that's it. I'm not really that bothered. I just want to lose like 5 pounds in you know, in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever. And I'm like, "Oh, you know, what can you do?" I think the fact is people have to be in a place where they want to make changes. But I think once they're on that wheel of change, I think it becomes much easier because they see results and they see that it's not as difficult as they thought it would be. And that only happens if they do it properly. They don't do it properly, that's when they end up in that yo-yo cycle, because they'll be back where they started 3 weeks before the next wedding that they want to go to or whatever. So it is really challenging, but I think I think you can't force people to do what they don't want to do. So I try to be a little bit like, I think I've been through all phases of this, obviously, in my history, and I've sort of figured out what works and what doesn't. And I think just being a bit less pushy and a bit less judgmental, because when you're like, when you come across as going, well, I've lost loads of weight and I did it this way and I've been really successful and I am so wonderful, I think it just turns people off from listening to you. Like nobody wants to hear you kind of just be better than them, or claim to be better than them. And it just feels a bit smarmy if you're doing it like that. But you know, you almost have to like use those little psychological techniques, like ask them questions rather than tell them things like, you know, what sort of foods do you like eating? You know, what's the worst thing about dieting to you? You know, and then you can say, you know, that there are other ways of doing it if you're interested. And you know, it's just sort of gently introducing the ideas rather than shoving it down people's throats, I think.
It's this like strict, isn't it? I think as well, for a bodybuilding standpoint, it's like that goal of going to stage. It's such a extreme goal that it's almost like you got that date in mind. Nothing's going to stop you, so you go all in.
Yeah.
You know, we both resonate with trying to help people, support people mentally.
Mm.
You know, when you do go all in on a goal, and even if that was, you know, quite a big diet for a holiday or something like this. You know, it's then you get to the holiday or you get to the show, and then it's like, holy shit, you know, then there's
And
food.
yeah,
Yeah, and you're sort of, I mean, not forced to socialize in all scenarios, but some people are almost forced into that external pressure, and people don't understand them. And we know, I'm sure you've spoken to many people, when the relationship with food is skewed in whichever direction, when you're then inundated with external pressure or food's available, it's very, very tough
yeah,
psychologically.
yeah.
It's tough. So when we talk about, you know, the yo-yo dieting and trying to almost establish the basics, if you speak to people in your GP practice or from a health standpoint of trying to sort of motivate and change their lives, is there any of those psychological tools that you tend to use within that? For people that are listening, maybe, you know, like, I want to help my mum and she's not a bodybuilder, and there is people listening that want to sort of help maybe their other half or
Yeah.
a family member to just start to make a few changes from a health standpoint.
I think often kind of just letting them see what you're doing can be really useful, because sometimes, you know, like I look back to kind of the first time that I sort of got into deciding to give it a good go with like weight loss and stuff. And it was it was actually someone who I followed on Twitter who had posted like their in the olden days, you could link your MyFitnessPal with your Twitter feed, so it would post your like food diary every day.
Oh,
Yeah, like it just would auto post it when you completed your diary for the day. It auto post it to Twitter,
ah,
and this guy was like, I remember his, you know, profile had like a six pack and stuff, and it's well, this is what I've eaten today, and I was like, oh, this will be interesting. I bet he lives on like lettuce and chicken. And I looked at it, and it was just a really, really normal diet. So it was like, I think it was oats for breakfast, a Subway for lunch, and then which sold me straight away. And then like
my
a,
clothes
you
to
know,
Subway.
exactly, like cottage pie and potatoes and vegetables for dinner. And I was like, what? You know, and it was a bit of a disconnect for me. This was a random connection on Twitter. This wasn't like, I wasn't following fitness people at the time. I didn't know anything about fitness. And so I was like, I remember kind of messaging him and going, is that true? Like, you know, what you eat? And him sort of having a chat to me and going, oh yeah, like, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, you can diet, you know, talking about calories, all that kind of stuff. You know, it doesn't have to be difficult. And I think this is the thing, is if you show people enough, they will often get interested and they'll ask questions. And I think that's where it gets useful. I think like with a lot of people who have had many, like a lot of history with the yo-yo dieting, for example, and again, this isn't universal to everybody, so I don't necessarily recommend this to everybody, but I think if people have got a bit of an issue with how they lose weight, then often I kind of try and move them away from weight loss as a goal. Not to suggest that they don't want to lose weight or that they shouldn't lose weight is what I mean, but having weight loss as the primary goal. Because I think if you decide I want to lose 5 kilos, then you might do some weird, silly stuff because you want to do 5 kilos, because that means that your goal is what's written on the scale, not how you feel, what your health is, even what you look like or whatever. It's, you've literally just tied yourself to this completely arbitrary, like gravitational number, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you say, actually, I want to be healthier, fitter, more active, you know, lead a healthier lifestyle, etc., then you're achieving the goals every day. You don't have to have an outcome to that process. You can have just the process itself. So every day that you do 10,000 steps and you eat, you know, minimally processed, mostly whole foods diet with plenty of, you know, fruits and vegetables and lots of fiber and drink plenty of water. Every day that you do that, you're achieving that goal. Now, if you do all of those things, you reduce your substances, reduce your stress, improve your sleep, it doesn't matter what the number is on the scale, because all of those things independently of weight are going to improve your health, right? And your goal is to be healthier.
Mm.
But also, you can pretty much guarantee that in the vast majority of cases, the number on the scale will also probably move in the direction that you want it to as well, if you are doing all of those things. And so rather than focusing on that number, which isn't a behavior, that you can't choose the number, but you can choose how many steps you do. You can choose what you eat. You can choose, you know, how much alcohol you drink or what time you go to bed, or all of those sorts of things. So it kind of takes you out of that failure mindset as well, because you're not spent, you know, you're not getting to the end of every day going, oh, still not at my goal. Oh, still not at my goal. Oh my God, I've put on a pound because I drank a glass of water. You know, it's all of these sorts of things that we just get so emotionally attached to. Not everybody. I think plenty of people aren't at all emotionally attached to the number on the scale, and therefore not such an issue for them. And that's also fine too. I hate it when we all, you know, we say everyone's got to do it in exactly the
Yeah.
same way.
Yeah.
But I think if people have got a big like dieting history, then often, you know, moving them away from quote unquote being on a diet and just changing those individual things, you know, maybe gradually, like one at a time rather than all in one go, I just think can be quite helpful.
Yeah, it's very, very common that people tie almost their self-worth to the number
Yeah.
on the scales. And I talk from experience, you know, I'm sure many of the listeners
Same.
will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting actually, Mike, is that when I've spoken about this with male guests, because of course I have male and female, that it is still very much on the peripheral for a lot of men. And I think that we assume that actually it's, oh, females are obsessed with the scales, but even aside from the competitive bodybuilding realm, you know, you do tie it to, I was there for years where it's like I look at the number on the scales, that is depicting
Yeah.
my whole day, you know.
Yeah,
It,
absolutely.
it is wild. I guess it would be quite useful from your standpoint, actually, sort of not outside of bodybuilding, but outside of the sort of competitive realm, working with other people outside of that. What are tools to actually get away from the scale weight being such a driver? Obviously, you've mentioned about making it a lifestyle. Psychologically, if you are so transfixed on the scale, is there anything additional that you can think of that would be worth people listening to sort of think about to move, you know, away from
Yeah.
that?
Stop weighing yourself. I mean, mainly, but I think that again, and that's very unrealistic if like in a bodybuilding situation, because obviously weight is important and it's an important part of that goal. And I think it's really also important to differentiate between like that competitive goal, and taking on that competitive goal and all the things that it has along with it, and being prepared for that as a competitive goal and all of those little problems that you might have as a result of it, and general day-to-day population people. You know, it is a really different process, and I think that's also something that we get very wrong. And I remember like probably one of the closest I got to having like a fitness breakdown was when, you know, I was trying to lose weight, and I'd started working with a PT, and I was all, you know, getting properly into like strength training, like squats and deadlifts and all this kind of stuff. And he was really big on, you know, clean eating, which is what it was always called by everyone at the time, and has now got a bit of a bad rap for that, you know, for that name. And I remember this one point where I was just like, just completely miserable because I was eating awful food out of Tupperwares because I didn't really know how to prep food well. And this was a guy that like, you know, just didn't really care what food tasted like really. And I did care what food tasted like. And I was becoming quite unhappy with how like sad my food was. And I was like, but this is what's so ridiculous is I'm on a stricter diet than like a bodybuilder in prep, but I've got nothing to show for it. You know, I think my exact words to him, and probably I wouldn't encourage people to talk about themselves in this way, but I was like, I'm eating like a bodybuilder and looking like a fat GP. And it just felt really unfair. Like, you know, what am I doing this for? And it, you know, it was really unnecessary for my goals. And like, and I've dieted in every single way possible. And the progress that I've made in the diet has been the same, whether I was on paleo, whether I was on, well, at one point I cut out wheat, sugar, and dairy entirely, which was not pleasant. And, or whether I was on flexible dieting, or clean eating, or whatever you know, whatever you want to call all of the different things. I did a 12-week prep where I worked with a coach who put me on a meal plan of chicken, broccoli, and rice twice a day, and oats. You know, like I've done every type of thing, and then I did it once where I did it myself, but instead of meal prep, I had M&S ready meals. So it was like the complete variety of these different healthy, high protein ready meals, which were really tasty. And I was like, I just want to see if I could do the same just by having ready meals. And I did exactly the same. It was like exactly the same amount of what kind of weight loss in that period of time, and just as successful. And I think that's what's so interesting is like, as long as you find what you can do long term, that's really helpful. But that doesn't work in extreme stuff like bodybuilding, because you know you're always going to have to push it that little bit further. But I think it's reminding ourselves that not everybody is a bodybuilder. Not everybody should do a 12-week shred with a photo shoot at the end of it. You know, it's just, it isn't for everybody. But I think because, you know, we see it happening on social media, it's a great, you know, it seems like a great way to kind of showcase your progress or do something a little bit different, challenge yourself. And I've done it twice, so I have nothing bad to say about it. But what was really interesting to me when I did it is I did it with a group of people at my gym on two different occasions. And what was so interesting was how differently people responded to it. And I mean psychologically rather than physically. You know, you had people who ended it in incredible shape, who were crying their eyes out because they could see bits of body fat that they didn't want to be there. And you had people doing it who were like, had lost a bit of weight and looked better than they did and weren't super lean, but were like so happy because they're like, look at me, like I can't believe how great I look, you know. And it's just, it's so interesting to see that people can make the same progress, and you know, one person can look objectively worse than somebody else but the other person will be much more miserable about it. And it's, you know, really difficult. And by the way, just to make, if anyone's listening who did those shreds at my gym, I'm talking about myself by the person that looked worse, not anyone else. So like,
Just
don't
in
think that. Yeah, yeah,
case.
exactly.
I really love how you described that actually, because I do get people come to me that are looking to diet and they've been told by previous coaches, well, unless you're doing a shoot or a competition prep, you know, I don't know if there's much point. So these
Right.
clients and people that come to me, they're like, I really don't want to do a photo shoot. I do not
Yeah,
want to step on stage. I just want to feel comfortable in my body.
yeah,
For me, like you described there, when a lifestyle client reaches a goal and they're like, I can't believe this is me. I'm wearing like a
yeah,
vest, or they're so grateful, Mike.
yeah,
It's just amazing, isn't it?
yeah. And I think that just comes with a lot of the, you know, a lot of the reasons that people will do stuff like photo shoots is because they, I think, will think that it's going to solve all of their problems.
Yes.
And being lean is going to solve all their problems and make them look exactly how they wanted to look. And, you know, I think, you know, I'm not saying I was without my hang-ups when I did my, you know, my photo shoot. And it certainly, like, it weirded me out fully, like, to do it because it was so out of my comfort zone. So like, I'm still happy that I did it. And, you know, but it just, I just think that we got to be careful in how we frame these things for people. And I think that what can be difficult within the fitness industry is, like, by definition, people who work as personal trainers and coaches are usually quite driven when it comes to fitness, and usually quite goal orientated as well. And if they set their mind to a goal, that, you know, they'll achieve it, particularly if it's a fitness related goal, you know, whether it is a, you know, an Ironman or a bodybuilding competition or whatever. Like, you know, it's just more common among that kind of sector of people, right? And I think sometimes it can be difficult to tap into the mindset of a Gen Pop person and what they actually want. And I think that sometimes coaches can want you to want something that you're just not that fussed about. And the best coach will kind of get into what it is. Will, I think, do a healthy mix of what they think is good for you
Yeah.
and what you want, you know, what you want for yourself. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's the client that obviously wants something completely unrealistic, and it's the coach's job to try and kind of, you know, pull them away from it. And I've seen, you know, I've got a lot of friends who are coaches, and I've seen them struggle with this. I've seen them have clients who want to compete, who they're like, you know, they don't necessarily think that they should compete, but also they recognize that they would be safer in their hands than perhaps in the hands of another coach who might, you know, who might not understand them and their own sort of foibles and all that kind of stuff. So they're then put in this difficult position where they're supporting them to do something they don't think they should be doing, but trying to keep them safe doing it. And that's a tough job to do as well.
It is tricky. I speak from personal experience. You know, it's not away from the norm that I've gone to bed thinking, you know, have I delivered that in the right way,
Mm.
when I am trying to reframe what
Yeah,
the goal is for the client. Because you're so right, it's our job, it's due diligence to do that. And now I know not every coach is going to maybe think that way, but the ones that do, I always say this, you know, if there is red flags or whatever we want to call
Mhm.
it, or if something's telling you in your gut this client is not ready for X, Y, or Z, be truthful and honest, because it's
Yeah,
you as the coach that's potentially going to get a backlash there.
yeah,
It's tough because we take it very seriously, you know, if you are of that nature, and you can almost feel, like I say, going to bed thinking, oh my God, you know, is this client going to take this in the right direction, and are they okay? But my fear, as it were, is that they're going to then go with another coach, and
yeah,
perhaps, you know, and this is PD realm as well, Mike, you know,
yeah,
that someone's wanting to utilize PEDs and they're not nailing their diet and the basics, and then
yeah,
having that conversation. I'm
yeah.
sure you've heard many stories.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. I think it's just really it's a really difficult place to be, and I think yeah, I mean, I think we sort of exist in a world now, particularly in the fitness industry, where there's a lot of things that were taboo before that have now become not taboo. And I think this is it's a really tricky terrain to navigate, especially when you're talking about stuff like PEDs, because I think like all of us were very critical in the past of like the whole fake natty thing, and you'd have kind of people selling unrealistic goals to young kids who, you know, might be really susceptible to, you know, buying products and, you know, buying like all of these supplements because they thought that's how they're going to look like their idols, when in reality their idols are smashing a load of gear and it wasn't how they were achieving their goals. And that's really dishonest and unpleasant. But I think what often happened in those days is that, you know, these young, impressionable kids would buy a few supplements that they didn't need, not make as much progress as they wanted to. And then by the time that they got to an age where they realized that everyone was on gear, they were probably no longer that bothered about it. And they'd sort of moved on to other goals and stuff as well. Whereas now we're in a situation where it's really promoted to be honest about steroid use and stuff like that, which is, of course, a good thing. Like, of course, we should be promoting being truthful. But I almost think it's swung in the other direction, that it's almost this impression that you can't make any progress at all unless you're on steroids. Like, it's not, you're not going to do anything unless you're taking steroids. Everyone's taking steroids. So then instead of the young, impressionable kids buying some supplements that they don't need, they're now kind of thinking, well, I've got to take steroids now because everybody who I watch on YouTube is taking steroids and this is their stack and this is what they're doing. You know, even though you've also simultaneously got quite a lot of, you know, decent kind of bodybuilder influencers actively encouraging people to not take steroids until they're a certain age, etc. So I think everyone's trying their hardest to like prevent this, but I think it is part and parcel with that honesty is there is going to be some normalization of PED use, and there are going to be a lot of people who probably shouldn't be using PEDs, who otherwise might have just grown out of it after a few years of trying, that are now going to take steroids in their youth, and then that's going to be, you know, causing some problems for them as well. I don't know what the answer is to it, because you know, I'm reticent to say that people should be less open about it, because I do think people should be open about it. Of course they should.
Mm,
But I think also kind of framing it in a way that's healthy is really useful as well. I think with a lot of the younger fitness influencers, there's a lot of like intense kind of glorification of steroid use. Like a lot of, you know, we're talking kind of not perhaps our generation of, you know, bodybuilding industry, but the generation to come.
mm,
Um, I think quite worrying, because they're kids themselves and they don't really know what they're talking about. And, you know, a lot of them may suffer from significant health problems before too long, and that's not that's not reassuring either. So you know, it's a real worry.
I guess from your health background and being, you know, working as a GP, you can see where this can go. But then, like we've mentioned, like this clickbait culture, it's like, oh, you know, I'm quite young here. I'm going to give these a go. And
Yeah.
you maybe don't know. And I think that certainly, like you say, it's good to be honest, because there are people out there that would potentially take substances
Mhm.
and then have side effects. And then they're thinking, you know, I'm alone here. I don't know what to do, you know,
Yeah,
female sterilization or things
yeah,
that
yeah,
occur. So for sure, like what you're saying there, it is that fine line though, isn't it? It's like, I always, if I talk openly about PD use, it's like, we're not saying this is the stack to take. This is, you know, this is going to give you this, because of course, also it's an individual response. And you do ideally need to do your homework, but this is back to the studies, isn't it? Is someone going to sit there and read a study about if they take X amount of anavar per day for X amount of time, this
Yeah.
will happen? Or are they
But
going to,
and that's the other problem, is that there aren't really any studies about it, really, because of ethics and things, and because they're essentially not illegal drugs, obviously, to use, but illegal drugs to distribute. They are, it's very difficult to find decent evidence. So as a result of that, the vast majority of experts are self-proclaimed. Like, they're people who have used steroids, or who have read what they think that they know, and what they know about steroids. And it's difficult to, even for me, like, I see people talking about steroids and I go like, well, who knows about steroids? And people will go, oh, this person, and this person, they're really good. And then I'll go, right, I'm going to look up their credentials, and I'm like, well, I don't get it. I don't, there's no way for, like, for someone as a consumer to differentiate between, some really impressive people that are really experienced and give out really good knowledge and good information on steroids, and someone who just is trying to, build a following by talking more about steroids. And that's not to say that those experts aren't out there. And I feel like I've got a fairly decent grasp of, of who to listen to and who not to. But I think it's very difficult for people who don't have the contacts and know the people within the industry to actually figure it out for themselves, if that makes sense.
yeah, it is, it's tricky though, isn't it? Because you've only got to hear someone say, oh, I've taken PED advice off of X person, and then they inquire, and suddenly this person in their mind, maybe even, or other people's mind, it's like this person is a PED expert.
Yeah.
But then I've heard stories, I don't know if you have, of, people have died from steroid
Mm,
use. It's no joke. And
yeah.
people won't hear about that side of it. And this is what is even more tricky as well. This is the sort of depths to it. We're peeling an onion here, Mike.
Yeah.
But it is, things like deaths happening, or the side effects going to quite a strong degree. We might hear about it because we're on the professional side, as it were, but consumers don't. And
Yeah. Exactly.
it's a slippery slope, because how do you get to those people that are, oh, I'm really going to try this thing? Because it is quite exciting, like, bodybuilding in general. It's like, this is really cool. But then it's the depths of a prep or side effects that happen, or any of these things. You suddenly think, oh shit, what do I do now?
Yeah. No,
Mm.
exactly. It is really tricky. And then you've got kind of, even from the harm reduction side, which I think harm reduction stuff has improved massively. But then there's this impression that, well, if you're getting your bloods done and stuff, you're fine. You don't need to worry about those side effects. And as we've seen from many people, like, in the industry, who've, had significant problems over the last few years,
Mm.
it's not, there's more to the story, isn't there? And I think it is quite concerning, but it also just makes you sound like really boring to
Yeah.
be, like, you're always just telling people not to do something that they want to do. And naturally, people don't want to listen to a GP who has never competed telling them that they shouldn't use steroids. And so, that's why it's difficult to kind of get the right people in the right places to give out the right information. And it can be super frustrating.
Actually, it reminds me as well, and I'll ask you this as a question. I saw one of your posts about body image and loving the body you're in. Now, I would say, of course, everything we've spoken about already, this is the skewing of body image and body dysmorphia, and what a lot of people
Mm.
face. And I really liked how you put it about, love the body you're in, but then if you're going on your path towards a goal, that's going to help you to love the body you're in. So you're not saying don't, tie it to losing weight or whatever is the goal, because that's still a good thing. But the body image, I guess this culture we're in is quite scary as well. We're talking about mental health as well from PD use, and
Mm.
what can happen there. You know, when you're in this comparison mindset and you're not happy within your own body, I'm sure, again, you've heard a lot in this regard. It is psychological warfare, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's, again, the cultural landscape of body image is really challenging at the moment, because you've got kind of body positivity on one end, and
Yeah.
then you've got, like, extreme diet culture on the other end, and then you've got everything in between, and trying to kind of navigate that is really difficult. And if you receive the wrong messaging, I think it can be really dangerous. Like, actually, I think, me, 10 or so years ago, being told that, actually, you know, it's all right, you're great just as you are, I'd have listened to it probably, because I really like eating cake, and that allows me to do that. And you know, it's not that I want to not eat cake, but it's about finding the balance between actually, like, you know, loving your body, which it's, I find it really cringy kind of even talking about it in those terms, because
Yeah.
I don't really know very many people who are like, you know, I
Rocking.
love my body.
Yeah.
um but I think accepting it is quite important,
Mhm,
because you can't really, even if you want to change it, you can't really change it unless you accept sort of where you are.
mhm, mhm,
And hating it isn't going to get you anywhere, is it? So actually, like, you're going to get better, but if you love your body, or if you try and love your body, or if you try and accept your body, then you'll want to treat it better, surely, right? So I think it's kind of just finding that balance where, you know, where you sort of parent yourself a little bit, rather than like just pander to all of your whims or be really mean to yourself. Like, if you think of a parent trying to get a child to do something, they don't just tell them they're rubbish at it, do they?
mhm,
Um, but they also don't just tell them, oh, it's absolutely fine, you got all the, you know, you did really well on that, because they didn't. They find a way of encouraging them to improve. And I think if we sort of parented ourselves a little bit better, we probably would end up in a better place ultimately.
It's like, again, it's hard to talk about, like, but self-care or self-love,
Yeah.
it's like this woo-woo thing. But honestly,
But it's
like,
self-parenting, isn't that's what self-care is? It's recognizing, like, because you're not, you know, self-care isn't eating a donut. If
yeah.
like, because if you were looking after a child and you wanted to bring up a child, you're not just going to feed them donuts, are you? But you might give them a donut from time to time as a treat. But you also want them to eat all their vegetables, right? So it's about that balance. You want them to be clean. You want them to be well dressed. You know, all of those sorts of things that you want for people. That's what self-care is self-parenting. It's not just like giving into your, you know, just what you want to do. Like, that's just like hedonism, isn't it? It's not self-care at all. And I think that's where everyone gets like confused. People think that self-care is like donuts and baths, but it's not, is it?
And a face mask and cucumber.
Exactly.
I love how you said it like that and framed it like that, because I've certainly been on my own journey from competing for many years, and now I look at my food as health. Like, I look at my
Yeah.
plate, I'm so happy with the vegetables
Yeah.
and the nice foods. And then, you can, again, it's like lifestyle versus a competition
Yeah.
prep. Very, very different, of
Yeah.
course.
Exactly.
However, when you are in a prep, and I speak from personal and working with clients, it's like your view on food, your relationship with food, would be stupid to think it's not going to change. And I
Yeah.
think that, a lot of people say, I don't have issues with food. And it's like, well, why is that coming out your mouth in the first place? But no one's blaming you, but
Yeah.
you've almost got to, I don't know, say, validate, no, I'm fine with food, I've got no issues.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could sort of help me delve into that from a psychological standpoint, as to when someone almost like starts a conversation with, I'm fine with food, I don't have any issues, when perhaps,
Yeah. I mean, define a normal relationship with food. You can't. It's really difficult to, because everybody's approach to food is different. What food means to different people is different. Like, for some people, food is the backbone of all of their socializing. It's the backbone of their culture, their family life, all of those sorts of things. It's the most important thing ever. And for some people, food is just, it's just fuel. People don't care about it. And that might be, you know, that might not be natural. That might be something that they've convinced themselves to do because it serves them achieving a goal, for example. So, like, you know, bodybuilders, for example, might talk in that way. And it might not necessarily be how they were naturally conditioned by their life, but it might be how they've become because of the lifestyle that they've chosen. And that's also fine as well. But I think, you know, it just is, it is really difficult. I think if someone's being defensive about their relationship with food, then chances are that maybe they've got more of an issue than they realize. But I think, like, you know, I've got issues with food. You know, I can list them for you if you like, but it's not massively helpful. But like, for example, I think that my relationship with food was at its worst when I was overweight. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of forget, is that we worry about people's relationships with food from dieting, but we forget that sometimes if people are in an unhealthy lifestyle, that's also because they've got a poor relationship with food. And you know, I really struggled to, I don't know if it was almost like a scarcity mindset, but like applied to food. I was always terrified of ending up hungry. So I would always like preemptively eat and then eat when the food was available, you know. So,
Yeah.
and I would also, you know, like I'd always have dessert every time. Like it was almost like every time I went out for dinner, as though I never went out for dinner, I had to make the most of every single time. And I agonized over what I'd choose. But I was going out for dinner like 5+ times a week. So it wasn't like it was, you know, I could have had a salad once in a while as well. It wouldn't have been the end of the world. I didn't have to have a dessert every time, even if nobody else was having a dessert. But that's just sort of something I did. And so you reframe things and do things in different ways to try and counteract that. And sometimes you develop little other quirks through it as well. And then sometimes you don't even know the difference. Like, you know, when I started dieting, one of the first things that I did was I started drinking black coffee. And I think I really like black coffee, right? But then someone said, "Do you actually like black coffee, or do you just drink it because it's got no calories in it?" And I was like, "No, I like it." And then I was like, "I don't, I don't actually know." But I still don't really want to waste 100 calories or 150 calories on a latte when I could be having like a Galaxy Ripple or something instead, right? So, you know, this is the thing, is that you then end up almost in that in a different sort of mindset about it. And then I get to thinking, well, is it the end of the world if I don't know if I like black coffee or not, but I'm drinking it? Obviously, I don't hate it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be questioning myself about whether I like it. So big deal. Like, is it, you know, am I suffering because I'm having black coffee rather than coffee with milk? No. So big deal. You know, like I think sometimes we agonize, but oh no, you shouldn't do that because it's restrictive. But it's not really actually having a restrictive effect on you, even if it is restrictive.
And actually, as well, restrictive wise, people, and I speak from experience, you get off on it. You're like, well, I don't need it, you
Yeah.
know, and that
Yeah.
unleashes like almost the opposite. And I really like how you spoke about there about when we're going for a meal, it's like almost like the famine's gonna happen
Yeah.
and you've got to have your dessert or whatever. That is so, so true in the off-plan realm when you're on
Yeah.
a food plan all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
And I
And you
don't
don't know what to do with yourself when you're not.
no. And when you're faced with a menu after a show, or even if it's a little bit further from when you've competed, you know, it's a sense of overwhelm, isn't it? And you're suddenly
Mm.
like, oh my God. And you described it there. It's like, what do I get? And then I don't know if you had this, but you sometimes eat it so fast that suddenly you're like, oh, I don't even remember what I did there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And almost like this sort of counting down to the off plan and wanting to that's your treat. And I guess sometimes there is again a culture of, you know, like you say there with the black coffee, it's like, do you even like it? Again, a different sort of side tangent, but when you frame something as a treat or a cheat or
Mm.
what you're telling yourself there. So you're on a food plan in the week to attribute to your goals, but then it's like, but you deserve a treat. And then that can often, you know, unleash this like, I've done really good, so I'm going to have, well, all of this food or drink or whatever.
Yeah, like maybe your treat is your progress, actually. And I think this is again, you know, it just is, there's so much now in social media of like we've almost gone the other way. We had all these like, you know, the motivation and the discipline and people trying to, you know, get you to work harder and do more and be better and all that kind of stuff. And then we've now gone in the other direction. We're like, oh, you don't have to work that hard. You can just be like a little bit mediocre. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And I think it's a shame because sometimes actually I do want to be inspired. I don't want to, you know, I've seen enough it's okay to fail posts. What about like it's okay to succeed? You know, like it's okay to smash your PBs and to, you know, to do really well on like to make healthy choices and to, you know, to not have an extra ice cream because you didn't need it. Like, you know, there is a balance to be found, I think, in the middle. And I think it's hard because some people have been so damaged by that relentless sort of motivational lifestyle. You know, it is important to say, look, you know, it doesn't have to be that hard all the time, but also it can't be easy all the time either. We do have to remember that as well. And I think it is important to kind of strike that balance. And you know, I think sometimes I reflect on my own sort of content because I often counteract those things. I love the path of least resistance, but I also am aware that, you know, even in that context, I still am getting up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym before work at least sort of 3 or 4 times a week. So, it's kind of like I don't want to sell this kind of false dichotomy of like actually it's either all or nothing. And I think that social media does that a little bit too much. And I think we should be saying like, yeah, actually it's okay to eat, to eat an ice cream from time to time. Like, of course it is.
Mm.
It's nonsense to suggest otherwise. But it's also okay to make sure that you're doing loads of physical activity and enjoying that as well. Like, I think it's important to remember that actually it is a treat to be healthy. It's a treat to be able to go to the gym. It's a treat to be able to go and do like a pain-free squat, for example, and a lot of people don't get to do those things. So instead of focusing on what a treat it is to eat a brownie, which I agree it is, and I do also want to eat a brownie from time to time, we have to remember what a treat it is, to actually be physically active, physically healthy.
And there is points of nourishing that in maybe more so competitors or maybe serial dieters, that finding that point of being able to incorporate certain foods
Mhm.
can be very difficult when
Yes.
you are that driven individual competing or dieting or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And that can have a huge detriment on your relationships around you,
Yeah.
your own mental health, your own self-worth. And then it's like, from a coaching standpoint, I'm sure you would agree, nurturing someone. I really like how you sort of say parenting
Yeah.
in a constructive way, because
Yeah.
it's like sometimes you've got to convince someone, okay, your goal is to get healthier overall, right? We're not looking at a competition, we're not doing these things. I want you to talk to me. What sort of foods do you enjoy? What
Yeah.
memories would you like to make with them? Would you like to
Yeah.
go for a meal with your family? That's very scary for some people,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because of,
Absolutely.
yeah, where they're at, and the social media hype, of course,
Yeah.
does help. And when we talk about, like good and bad foods, now again, this is this is an open-ended argument discussion, however we want to frame that. But I always think that there's no good or bad foods. All food is food, but it's appropriate to your goal.
Yeah.
And also sometimes, like, it might be that you want to enjoy an ice cream. Yes, it's not going to bring you brilliant nutrition and what have you, but if that's within a good diet, as it were, like you mentioned at the start, generally whole foods, right? If you can, you enjoy it much more, I find, as well. I don't know about you, when you have like the treats rather than like, oh, this big binge or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so for me, I would say it's not whether a food is unhealthy or healthy, it's whether your diet is unhealthy or healthy, as a whole. And I think there are some argument, there's a lot of nuance to this, right? Because there are lots of foods that offer zero nutritional value. I'm talking about like, the ultra processed foods. There's little nutritional value and potential harms that might be being caused by overconsumption of these things. But I think that it's all overstated again by social media. So I think that the fact is like, consuming a Dorito is not going to give you health problems. But
Mm.
if you live on Doritos, it is going to give you health problems, right? But there seems to be no nuance in that discussion. And it's fair to say also that you're more likely to overconsume Doritos than you are to overconsume broccoli. So, it's not completely out there to say it's unhealthy to eat Doritos, because for most people, eating Doritos is going to lead to eating more Doritos. And, so I get where people are coming from. And I think a lot of people, will think that actually it's just better to avoid Doritos than it is to eat 5 of them, because if you eat 5, you're also going to want to eat 10. And I think that that's also a fair argument, but it has to be up to the individual. And, if you take away something from someone's diet that they really, really love and that brings them a lot of joy completely, then the more likely outcome is that they're going to fail on that diet and they're going to end up over consuming that food anyway. Whereas if you, allow them to consume it in a moderate quantity that you do know is safe
Mm.
and within, the confines of their goals, etc., then you're more likely for them to stick to all of the other healthful things that they're doing with
Mm.
that diet as well. So I think it's important to kind of frame it from that perspective and not demonize foods, but recognize that some are more healthful than others. Like, I think it all gets lost in translation because it goes to this whole like dichotomous thinking. So someone goes, oh, it's really bad to eat. I'm going to use a different example than Doritos now. And I can't think of anything at
Ice
all. It's
cream.
really bad to eat ice cream. So someone goes, well, no, actually, it's not that bad. Like you can eat some ice cream. It's perfectly fine to eat ice cream. And then the other person says, oh, so you're saying everyone should live on ice cream now? I can't believe you're promoting ice cream. And it's like, no, you're not promoting it. You're not saying people should live off it. You're saying that people should be sensible and not like, completely cut everything out.
Mm.
I mean, actually, as it happens, ice cream is pretty good in terms of calories and what's got in it and stuff like that.
In
It's not bad at all. And also, like, we have never lived in a time more than we do now where low calorie alternatives have been as good as they are now. The
it.
ability to get a high protein, low calorie diet now compared to 15 years ago, I mean, it's worlds apart. You think of all of and I'm not suggesting that people should live on protein puddings and protein mousses and protein everything, but the fact that you can end your day with like a protein chocolate mousse that's actually bigger than, a chocolate mousse that you'd have bought in the shop and more filling and tastes, I would say pretty much exactly the same, is not a bad shout, is it? And it's got fewer calories and everything. And I just think we're really lucky to have this access to all of this food. And you know, while we should be living off processed foods, they do have a function and they do make it much easier to have a healthy diet, as well as making it much easier to have an unhealthy diet. So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I don't think. You've got to kind of just have a little bit of balance. And I think we have to remember that, eating a family pack of Doritos is different to eating a protein mousse from Aldi.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like as well that acknowledgement of triggers. So you said that
Yeah.
there, like the Doritos, if that's something that is a trigger to you, it certainly is worth acknowledging that and trying to work on it. And I know, for my own journey, I've had to almost give myself therapy inside here to actually be able to accept now, having off plan or being able to incorporate even like a protein mousse or something. It's
Yeah.
like, I've had to rewire my brain from 12 years of bodybuilding.
Yeah.
It's these extremes of lots of food or less food or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And that is a tricky path. It sounds like we've both been on our own path, as it were, with food and our relationship with ourselves. And even people listening, it does show that it's a work in progress. I talk very openly about it. And what I also try and remind people is that there's a lot of people that won't talk openly about it, but in their own head, they're suffering. They're finding it hard. Either they're incorporating a lot of the processed foods, or they're
Yeah.
scared to
Yeah.
incorporate any. And
Yeah.
you see it on social media, don't you, as well? It's like a coach will say this client has done everything to the letter, and I know they haven't. And
Yeah.
the coach is
Yeah.
saying, they've nailed the plan. And I know personally, I know the competitor or the coach, and it's like that's really difficult as well. And with the comparison side of things, from your point of view, if you've got any friends or people you speak to that are comparing themselves to others, what advice do you give around that other than don't go on social media?
Yeah, it's really hard because I think like I don't think comparison is always a bad thing, because I think, comparison can lead to things like inspiration and motivation. And, like I think sometimes, if like a bit of healthy comparison, a bit of like, well, actually, if they can do that, why can't I do it? Sort of thing can be quite useful. But I think the problem is what we're comparing ourselves with, and that's the issue with social media, is that we're comparing ourselves with something that isn't reality. And I think that's what makes it incredibly difficult, is that people are essentially presenting themselves like a sanitized version of themselves to us, and it's not realistic to compare ourselves to that. And I think that's what makes it very, very difficult. I think one of the tricks, like for me, I surround myself with quite a lot of people who are infinitely better than me at fitness. Like the people that I train with are, like my like I do a lot of training with my coach. He's my coach as well, but we're also friends, although he might not want to admit that. And we often train together, and the weights that he will warm up with are heavier than my 1 rep max. And so, well, what am I? Yeah, okay, I might compare myself, But what am I going to do with that comparison? I can't do, I physically can't try and, match him. So
Yeah.
there's no point in, in bothering. I just have to accept that there's this enormous difference. And sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable, but you've got no choice. You've just got to accept it. Everybody's a bit different. And I'd like to think that he's probably not as good a GP as I am, but he hasn't tried that, so we don't know. But that's what I can use to comfort myself. And I think that is something that is, it is natural to compare ourselves to other people, but also you've got to have a sense of humor about it. And, almost like I will laugh it off because often it's just so silly. Like it's such a pain. If we're training together, it takes half an hour to take all the plates off. I've done a workout already before I've done my set because I've had to remove half the plates off the bar. So, it is what it is. And you've just got to kind of accept our differences. And I think if you think that the comparisons that you're making to other people are becoming unhealthy, then I think it's your responsibility to back off basically and see if you can stop doing that.
Yeah, it is it's crazy like what we get in ourselves into these, like you get in such a fluster. And
Yeah,
also what you said about earlier, when you get to a goal and you're really happy, it's then making sure, well, trying not to then look at someone else and they're better than me. You were so
yeah,
happy. You were so
yeah,
happy with what
yeah.
you said. Obviously, when you're in a competitive mindset and in the sport of bodybuilding, I mean, fucking hell, Mike, of course, comparison is a thing because we're judged on stage, and it's
Oh,
important.
it's an impossible sport because it's not even objective.
Yeah,
So you are at the mercy and the whims of someone's opinion. Even if you've got criteria, those criteria might change from day to day, judge to judge. Who turns up on the day, all of that kind of stuff. Like after you've played a game of football if you've played well,
yeah,
and if you've what high jump you've done or whatever, like that you've beat your PB and all that kind of stuff. But it's really difficult to be objective about about anything to do with your appearance, I think. So it's very difficult for us to judge ourselves. It's very difficult for other people to be judged by other people as well. And so like I take my hat off to people that do it, because it's just something that I think I would not be mentally strong enough to withstand, because I don't like it when someone doesn't like my playlist. So if they're telling me that I don't
I
look great
love.
in a pair of trunks, I'll be super sad about it. And that's not, it's not even about me. If I really like a song and I play it to someone and they don't like it, I take it so personally. If I cook something and someone's like, "Oh, I don't really like it," but like, what? I can't imagine being judged in my pants. Like it is something that is, I think, quite terrifying. So hats off to people that do it. And I think it's very understandable that people, do suffer a bit psychologically from doing it as well, because it's a bloody tough thing to do.
Yeah, of course, you are restricting for a long period of time and you're pushing against physiologically, what you should be doing. Your body doesn't want to be there. Like it's not normal in
Yeah.
quote unquote. And I think that again, when you're in that realm and you've done it for a number of years, it's your normal. But we forget that it's like, a very small percentage of people that would do this. And of course, the remit of health concerns that you can get off the back of doing this, and that's natural
Mm.
and assisted.
Yeah.
It's not just the assisted realm. And then of course mentality, you build this mental fortitude in a prep, and then you're tested to the
Mm.
absolute nth degree in that
Yeah.
post mode, that reverse out. Your
Yeah.
hunger hormones are all over the place, and you don't really know what to do. And then it's almost back to that parenting yourself,
Yeah.
being kind to yourself, realizing what you've done.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you'd have any advice in that post show, in that reverse out, when your hunger hormones are skewed and you are struggling. There's lots and lots of examples we could go through, but is there anything that you could sort of think of that would help people get through that period of time? Again, there is lots of different things you can do, but mentally, when you are struggling, maybe you have eaten more than you were going to. If we go with that example as like a binge and you want to get back on track, what would you say is a good?
I think it's so different for everybody. And I think I don't want to kind of,
Yes.
simplify it too much, because I don't know that I've necessarily got any any advice that would be useful for everybody universally, but from
Mm,
my understanding of advice that I see other people give, and I'm not taking credit for this, like I've understood people to be like trying to look forward rather than looking back, not, trying not to undo things that you've done, because then you end up in, and I think that's true for any sort of dieter, not just in prep, but trying to constantly chase to undo something. So if you think that you've overeaten, then trying to restrict yourself more the following day, which actually I think statistically means that you're then more likely to end up binging more as well. It's kind of just going back to just keeping trying to hit what you were trying to hit in the first place, not trying to then overshoot it to make up for lost time.
for sure. Have you found in the past that you've felt the like need to do over more cardio and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah, loads. I mean, and I've always, I think, like I've always dieted on quite low calories because I am, I think, a naturally quite a small person. And I think I think there's a lot of evidence that says that when you've come from a significant weight loss, you end up, I think, don't quote me on this, but I definitely have had conversations with nutritional scientists about this. And I'm pretty sure that your body wants more calories than it needs. So you do struggle, and also you also often end up being on lower calories. And I've always, if I've wanted to lose weight, I've always had to go quite low, I think, for compared to lots of other people that I know. But
Mm,
again, that's another comparison thing, isn't it? Life isn't fair. I
yeah.
can't eat the same things as my coach who lifts 4 times the weights that I do. Surprise, surprise. I've just got to deal with it. That's just what life is like. But I think that it's very natural when you're sort of in that position to then go, well, actually, if I can eat these calories, maybe I can eat fewer calories, and to actually just try and diet on as few calories as possible. And I think that there is a balance, because there is some evidence that using a more aggressive approach when you're more highly motivated can yield better results. But I
Mhm.
think if you push it more than you should, it then can also yield, binging and stuff like that as well. So it's really difficult to give advice on that. But I've definitely, been in situations where I've kept calories really, really low, and probably lower than I've needed to, because I felt like I wanted things to move faster or whatever. But
Mm,
I've not done that for quite a long time because I no longer I no longer care that much. Unfortunately, I find it harder to stick to a diet these days because I don't have a specific,
yeah.
like, goal as such. But actually, ironically, I then, once I'm doing it and once I'm in the swing of things, I find it very, very easy to adhere to stuff. I find it tough when it's when you're just when you're out of routine. I think is the only time I really struggle,
Mm,
is when you're eating out elsewhere or you're traveling or whatever.
yeah. Yeah. Would you say that when you've done your diets in the past and what you've sort of picked up, as it were, like, having protein, having fruits and veggies, etc., does that provide you now with what you eat on a daily basis? Do you still sort of adhere to some things, or do you just take each day as it comes, or do you have some
Yeah,
sort of rituals?
at the moment, like I'm actually kind of tracking again at the moment, because I do sort of want to. I I think basically what happened for me is that I kind of gradually, after I did sort of my photo shoot, which was back in like 2000 and I think 18 or 17 or something like now. Um, I then was sort of just aiming for this like consistency, and I found it really difficult to get it, but I never really rebounded that much.
Mhm.
And then as time went on, gradually sort of older habits sort of have crept back in. And then I think what happened was I got much more into training. I was training a lot more frequently and doing, more cardio and stuff as well. And so I was just hungry all the time. And then I think that if I'm hungry and not tracking, I then find it very difficult to kind of limit stuff. And I've had a few holidays and a few Christmases and all that kind of stuff. And just gradually over time, because I think also, again, and this is a really nuanced topic that I don't want to sort of say too much about, because I know that everybody's so different about this. But for me, like I wear scrubs. I realized I wear scrubs to work, and I wear the same scrubs now. I've worn the same scrubs at a difference of nearly 20 kilos in weight. So to be able to wear the same clothes, and you're not going to notice that you're gaining weight. It's actually very difficult to kind of notice these things. And so I think because I decided to be all like zen and holistic about it, I didn't have any markers of progress at all. So by the time I realized, that by the time my clothes were sort of not fitting anymore, I was like, well, actually, like I think I might have put on a bit of weight. And then I did step on the scales and I was a bit like, and I'm not super emotionally tied to scale weight because I know how changeable it is and how I can fix it if I want to, etc. So I didn't like freak out or anything, but I was a bit like, oh, I think I probably need to do something about this. And I don't think it's a terrible idea to do some tracking because I'm not going to be really rigid about it and I'm not going to be restrictive as such. But I obviously need to do something. Otherwise, I'm going to have to spend a load of money on a whole new wardrobe, but I don't really want to do that. And also, there's the health aspects as well, and there is also the aspect of I think like I did amazing stuff in my weight loss journey and sort of changing to a fitter lifestyle and that kind of stuff. And I've been working much more on things like my strength, and I've made loads of PBs and all of that kind of stuff in the last few years. But I've got to kind of I've got to rein in other stuff that I'm doing that isn't serving me particularly well. And I think we're almost embarrassed to admit, I almost feel bad admitting that because I don't want to be like encouraging everybody that they need to lose weight or anything like that, or that they need to track or that they necessarily need to weigh themselves. Because I get that for a lot of Gen Pop, that's not a great message to put out. But I think it's also important to say that actually, if it serves you well for a period of time, there's nothing wrong with doing it either.
Yeah, it's also as well looking at what you're doing well. So
Yeah,
you just listed things that are going really well, and then it's
yeah,
like I often have this conversation of, someone gets to a point, and it's a really good example, Mike, and you actually talking about it is a story, isn't it? So people listen and they go, okay, so this can relate to me, and it's like over time this can happen very, very slowly, and then also it's that substance to if it's taken years and years and years to put on X amount of weight,
mm,
then why in our minds are we sort of thinking, well, within 12 weeks, it's all gone?
exactly.
And that seemed, I'm not trying to, make a mockery of it, but this is where I try and say from a coaching standpoint, you need some time for this to be a sustainable and hopefully enjoyable process. Because
Yeah,
we know, actually fruits, veggies, the good foods, as it were,
yeah,
or whatever we want to call them, they are tasty, but
yeah.
you get into old habits. These habits can be from when you're a child, can't they?
Yeah. 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 And for me, it's stuff like for me, and I think the reason that I don't need to be restrictive is because usually the reason that I gain weight is because of the mindless stuff.
Yeah.
It's like the biscuit tin at work rather than necessarily going out for really nice meals or whatever. I think you can do all of the important and valuable food related things and still lose weight, but you do have to make some sacrifices. And I say sacrifices in inverted commas because I don't think not smashing a load of biscuits in the middle of a workday is actually that much of a sacrifice because it's not particularly enjoyable. You're just doing it because they're there, not because you're hungry. It's often just more a result of not having prepared for the day. Like if I'm having a really busy day at work and I haven't brought lunch, but there's a tin of biscuits there and I've got 5 minutes between the time I finish my morning clinic and the time I start my afternoon clinic, which sometimes I finish my morning clinic after my afternoon clinic has already started. So if that happens, what are you going to do? You're going to just end up like just having some biscuits or something. Whereas if I've got like 50 ready to drink protein shakes in the cupboard, I can just grab one of those and I know I'll feel full in a little bit.
Mm.
And that's not being restrictive because the alternative isn't healthier or better for you either psychologically or physically, but
Yeah.
it's about remembering that that's the case. Whereas if someone's brought in like an amazing homemade cake that they've baked because it's their birthday, I'm not going to go, oh no, I'm going to have a protein shake. I'm going to
Mhm.
have a piece of it, right? So I think it's important to recognize the difference between like mindless eating of junk and enjoying food that, in moderation.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly something I've had to relearn myself, and it is a message I talk about with, palate experiences and making
Yeah.
memories. And again, it might sound boring, right? But actually, when you sit down and you laugh with your loved ones, or it's someone's birthday, like you say at work, and
Yeah.
someone's actually put love and care into making the cake, or you go to a restaurant, you get dressed up, or something like this.
Mm,
Like it's very, very different to sitting in the kitchen on your own and just eating a load of
Yeah,
biscuits, like you say.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
And I mean, I, I have a really kind of variable outlook on it because I remember again when I did my 12-week prep type diets,
mm,
it wasn't so much that I felt I needed to do it that way. I sort of wanted to prove to myself that I could stick to it. Like, so it was that was part of the issue as well. And I went to a wine tasting, a cheese and wine tasting while I was on this diet. But I didn't have any cheese and wine. I had Diet Coke. But I didn't want to miss out on the social experience. All my friends were going to it and I wanted to go. So I went. And actually, like I think I can see how some people will feel like they might not feel confident to do that because they might have, people around them that aren't supportive of their goals. But I didn't really struggle with that. And everyone might like chuckled a little bit, but I was taking the mick out myself as I was like, oh my God, look at this massive basket of bread and I just can't have any of it. This is so like, that's really rubbish. But also, we're all just sitting around having a laugh and I'm drinking Diet Coke and big deal. Like,
yeah.
it's not the end of the world. I don't look back and go, I wish I'd eaten that cheese or I wish I drank that glass of wine because I didn't miss out on the event. So I think that again, you still can balance stuff, and I think it depends it depends what it is. If you're like getting married and you're taking a Tupperware of chicken and broccoli to your wedding, for example, that's a bit different to like having Diet Coke on a night out with your mates, like on a Wednesday night. So there is again, it's not universal and it's not the same regardless of what experiences it is.
Mm,
But I think, sometimes I just want to tell people to lighten up a little bit because it doesn't matter that much if they don't have, if they don't have a block of cheese, but it also doesn't matter that much if they do,
mm.
and we sort of agonize over these decisions about it and it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, we're allowed Diet Coke, Mike. Are you sure?
I know, right?
Like,
That's another podcast.
yeah, that's a whole nother realm. Now, before we wrap up, I do a listener question, but my other half, Matt, he follows you and has followed you for years, and he wants to ask the question. So I'm going to let him take it this one. Now,
Okay.
it was around superfoods and your sort of view on them. So the concept of superfoods and then green drinks versus veg. So a bit of a discussion into that was from Matt.
Okay. So, I mean, like, I'm just really skeptical of stuff. I think what's really important to say is that food is really powerful, nutrition is really powerful. I think, again, it's very frequently overstated. So, I mean, even just calling it a superfood is just a bit like it's a bit cringy, isn't it? They're foods that are high in nutrients. Cool. Like, eat blueberries. Definitely not telling people that they shouldn't. And, they're good for them. There are nutritional benefits to eating good food. We cannot deny that. But I worry about overstating these benefits because you have people walking around going, "Oh well, I'll always be fine because I eat superfoods," and then they're really shocked when they get a disease or something, which does happen. And I think it's important to just put this stuff into context and to not use it to necessarily demonize other foods. But I think there are definitely nutritional benefits to eating foods, and there's definitely foods that are more nutrient dense than others. Like, so I would say that that's fair and reasonable. When it comes to greens drinks versus vegetables, there's a few different issues. One of them is that a lot of green drinks are a load of rubbish anyway. Like they're proprietary blends that you don't actually know how much of each thing is in it. They don't state how much you're actually getting of anything. And then there's the actual nutritional benefits. And again, I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian, so like I definitely am going to misspeak slightly on this description, but I'm sort of explaining it from the standpoint. I've actually been planning to do a post on greens drinks,
Oh,
and I was going to do the research on it, but I haven't done it yet. So let me just muddle my way through this. But basically, there's a lot of talk about whether or not the nutrients that you actually absorb from these green powders are actually beneficial to you or can actually be absorbed in the same way that you would digest them if you were eating vegetables. And then a lot of the things that people think are beneficial about eating greens aren't really, there's no point in having them in those doses anyway, because you just like because of the way that they're digested and stuff. And they're really expensive. So
well,
like I think that the upshot for me is that like and I went through a phase. I used to have chocolate greens and they were disgusting. And I tried them for a while because I just thought I don't eat enough vegetables. Maybe it's not a bad idea to try them. And I couldn't commit to it anyway because it was horrendous. And then I tried some, like, I think they were ghost greens, like guava flavor, and they were actually really nice. But I still forgot to have them every day. So, and then they're really expensive. And so actually, like, just have vegetables because actually it's more enjoyable to eat food, I think, anyway. And all of the benefits that you get from eating vegetables, I think, far outweigh the benefits that you get from having a greens drink and you don't really know what you're having. I think it's a bit like, people like taking a multivitamin because it makes them feel like they're doing something. And I think that's often the case with greens drinks as well. But at the same time, if you're like minted and you want to have a greens drink, go for it. Like I'm not going to kind of say, oh no, you shouldn't do that. But I just think there's probably for a lot of people there might be more healthful ways to spend their money. Like, you could perhaps increase the quality of your diet in other ways for the money that you would be spending on those greens drinks. And I think that it's the same with training as well. There's just this, everybody's focusing on the small minutiae and little things that they're doing without actually addressing all of the bigger stuff that could be far more beneficial to them. Like, people might be, for example, an example that I often hear, and I'm not going to credit the person who told me this in case they don't want to tell it on a podcast. If anyone wants to know who told me this, I'll tell you. But like the idea that, mobility is really important, right? Stretching is important and all that kind of stuff. But if you're somebody who only has the capacity to get to the gym 3 times a week for an hour each time, and you spend 40 minutes of that doing mobility and 20 minutes of it doing weight training, then you got it wrong. Like you probably should, there are probably better ways to utilize that hour. If you're going to the gym every day for 2 hours, then you should definitely, you probably not definitely, but maybe you should incorporate a mobility routine into that, right? Or do some cardio as well. Whereas it depends on the constraints of what people are doing. So greens drinks, like what's the rest of their diet like?
Yeah.
If your diet is perfect and you want to supplement it with some greens, crack on. But I bet you could probably just be eating more vegetables.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously, again, it could be a whole nother podcast, but when people say they don't like certain food or they're not willing to try it, or, the limiting beliefs around maybe they haven't even tried it. I've done this,
Yeah.
like, I'm not
Yeah,
eating that. And then I'm like,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
the thought of vegetables sometimes, actually working on that. And as a coach, it's like asking questions to
Yeah.
almost lead the conversation to
Yeah.
be like, we probably could have some vegetables here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
They're not that bad.
They're not that bad. You just have to choose the right one.
Yeah. Maybe deep fried ones, Mike. Oh no.
Exactly. Or air fried ones. See, that's the thing. It's like there's so many options.
Yeah, yeah. It's 2024, guys. If you haven't got an air
Exactly.
fryer, you are missing out. Well, I knew this would be super cool, and of course, really cool to connect. Like I said right at the start,
Oh,
from seeing
likewise.
you as a guest speaker at Body Power. I think that was 2019, actually, Mike.
Yeah. Finally made it to body power, and then body power never happened again. It was
Wow. Do you know my first coach, Stephen Box?
yes, I know him very well.
I think that, yeah, I was thinking, when you like know by association, and I'm like, am I going
Yeah.
to say that and look like and then I was like, I'm sure, because he's obviously Warhammer now.
Yeah. So Steve got me into Warhammer as well to
Are
start
you
with.
into Warhammer?
Yeah, well, not really. I
Oh,
did.
oh,
So I
oh.
tried to get into Warhammer because of Steve. So when I sort of was introduced to Steve by the guy that was doing my nutrition, a guy called Emil, who
Yeah,
was
oh,
a part of
Neil.
Team Box. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Emil was one of my best friends. It still is one of my best friends, and he was part of Team Box, and that's how I met Steve. Was because Emil invited me to try playing Warhammer with them. But Steve was like super serious on Warhammer, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And it was because I'm not a natural dweeb despite appearances. Like actually when it comes to real nerdy stuff like that, I don't really get it. And so I tried to get into Warhammer because it was calorie free, and at the time I was struggling with what to do socially, like Warhammer worked for me. And then sort of fell out of it again, and then my coach now is really into Warhammer. So I went to the Warhammer Expo last year with my coach and with Steve and
I
with a few other people as
didn't.
well. Yeah, so I've got like Warhammer friends and everything. And they're all really into fitness. It's really strange that there's all like this world of like fitness nerds.
Yeah.
But it's been fun actually. I'm actually quite enjoying it now.
Yeah. My other half, he's just started it again, and like he'd just be in the kitchen, and he's set up a little area, you see, Mike, and he'd be
We'll
doing his.
have to recruit him.
He actually, because obviously he knows I was coached by Stephen, and he's like, watched his YouTube and stuff like that. I'm like, I could introduce you to him,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
We've
Steve's doing
got,
great with the Warhammer. It's like he's taken online coaching and put it into Warhammer as well. It's amazing. It's really
yeah.
great to see what he's done. It's
Yeah, for
fantastic.
sure. It's super cool. But of course, another connection for us. I will maybe send Matt towards your new tribe that is forming. He can bring his greens powder.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I love that. Thank you, Mike. I really
Thank
appreciate you.
you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey!